you, Erin. Good morning, everyone. Before we start talking about future strategies, I want to actually take us on a walk down memory lane. So, I want you to transport yourself back 30 years. It's 1989. Michael Keaton is Batman. Madonna has introduced us to Material Girl, and The Simpsons have just emerged on TV. The only thing in our hands is a Game Boy. Our hair is as big as the phones that are attached to the wall by cords. When we have to make a phone call, we don't have to use area codes to call locally. Remember that? Yeah, some of you don't want to admit it. If you actually have to make a phone call on your way to work when you've left your house, you have to pull over and use one of these things. Remember those days, right? There were no cell phones. We got the morning news in a newspaper. We didn't have a chance to really check in on the news until we came home that night and watched the evening news. When we went to work, we were at work. We were worker bees. And when we came home, we were at home. Work stayed at work. We drove around in what looked like really great-looking cars back then, but there was no OnStar, there was no GPS, there was no backup camera. There were no computers in our cars. So now, let's fast forward to 1999. The Simpsons are still on TV. They haven't aged a bit, right? The Sixth Sense and The Matrix are in the box office. Madonna is now British. She's culturally appropriating in Nothing Really Matters. And she's doing who knows what in Ray of Light. We're listening to music on Walkmans. And we are watching videos on TRL. We actually have cell phones now. And the only other thing we can do with a cell phone is play Snake. We might have an email, but we can't access it on our phones, right? Or any portable device. It's only accessible through a big, clunky computer that sits on a desk and takes forever to turn on and load up, right? Remember all that churning that used to happen? You might have thrown in a load of laundry, you might have started your marinara sauce, finally your computer comes up, and now you want to connect to this internet thing. So you most likely use America Online and you dial up to the internet. And you can throw another load of laundry in, fold the last load, right? Maybe you're actually ironing some clothes, who knows what. The point is that it's taking forever to connect. Remember Y2K? We thought the world was coming to an end in 1999. We didn't really understand the internet. We didn't really understand what was happening out there. You, however, were totally psyched about that disposable camera that you had. And you had to then take the film and go down to the Fox Photo or the Kodak store to actually get the film developed. And then you got all these fabulous pictures that you put in a photo album because there was no Instagram to upload your photos. And when you got to work, you were connected. You had some access to information, but you had to log on to this big, clunky computer to get that information. Work was still staying at work, and our home lives were still our home lives. If we needed directions, we could actually get those on the internet, but we had to print them out and carry them around with us, and they weren't that great. So if you were like me, you were often driving in circles because those darn MapQuest things didn't actually work. So now let's fast forward to 2009, just 10 years ago. We had our first African American president with Barack Obama. We were in the middle of the Great Recession. The first digital natives, the millennials, were entering the workforce. And we were starting to hear about this new form of media called social media. We had Facebook accounts, most likely. Some of us might have had Twitter. We were not getting our White House news on Twitter, right? That was for sure. We didn't have Instagram, so we all felt really good about ourselves. We did have Blackberries. We BBM'd with our friends, but we did not BBM with our colleagues, right? We had access now to information all the time. May not have been as fast, but it was there. We had access to that. So imagine sort of this workforce now that the millennials are in with access to information at their fingertips all the time. Now let's fast forward to 2019. The Simpsons are still around. They're like they're like Procter & Gamble practically, right? They haven't aged a bit, but now you only see them in a GIF or a meme. Social media is everywhere. We've got Facebook accounts, we've got Twitter, we've got Instagram. You're no longer having to wait for your news to get it in the morning paper or on TV at night, right? You've got access to news all the time in little bite-sized pieces that's firing at you constantly. We have information at our fingertips all the time. We wake up in the morning to gazillions of messages, emails, right? And instead of waiting for that computer to dial up, we can now check our email and our messages anywhere, anytime, lying in bed, while we're getting dressed, while we're sitting on the train. You thought I was going to say something else, didn't you? But we have instant access to information. If we decide to stay home and work from home, we can do that because we have everything we need on a computer that's smaller than a textbook. We can connect globally, face-to-face with people through our computers, through our iPads, through whatever smart devices that we have. We don't actually have to go to work to connect to people. Our work lives and our home lives have completely blended together at this point. If we decide that we want to drive, we actually have cars that have GPS in them that work, so you're no longer driving in circles. If you don't want to drive, you can actually use several different apps or you can use a couple of apps to find a perfect stranger to come and get you in their car and take you where you're going. And if four wheels aren't good for you and you want two, you can find a lime or a bird on the side of the road to take you where you're going. And I'm not talking about a fruit or a flying dinosaur, right? The point is that the world is changing really rapidly. Technology is disrupting how we do our work. By 2023, that's just 4 years away, we're going to have over 1.2 billion devices with artificial intelligence in them. So what does that mean for our work? What does it mean for how we do our work? We know that before 2040, actually, the AI experts are saying that human-level artificial intelligence will be a thing before 2040. We know that our jobs are going to be transformed. What's really stunning is that in the next 3 years, 85% of our jobs are going to be transformed. So what does that mean for us in the workplace? And how is our work going to evolve when our organization structures and our management structures are sometimes still operating like it's 1959 instead of 2019? We have communication platforms, project management platforms, all kinds of different platforms that manage our work. And our work is changing. How we do our work is changing. Yet we haven't necessarily adapted in organizations. We haven't thought about what that future is going to hold for people. Think about those millennials that enter the workforce in the midst of the crisis, right? They couldn't get jobs. And I know we labeled them as lazy and entitled, but they couldn't get jobs because the economy was a complete mess. And so what they had to do was go figure out how to work. And so they started as freelancers, right? They hung out their own shingle. It was easy for them to do that. They had technology, they had information, they had everything they needed. They had $50 to start their LLC, right? And so they joined the freelance economy, the gig economy, because they had to, because they didn't have a choice. But they're staying in it because they see the value in it. They can work on their own terms. They don't have to be beholden to the corporate structures that are outdated and don't allow them to do the creative and entrepreneurial work that they really want to do. The millennials have outnumbered the baby boomers in the workforce. More millennials are in the freelance and gig economy than anybody else, and they're choosing to stay there. By next year, 43% of our workforce will be freelancers. So how are we going to be thinking about our corporate systems, our work systems, our HR systems, when 43% of our workforce are not going to be workers, right? They're going to be freelancers. Think about the Gen Zs, that generation that's coming after the millennials. They're just starting to enter the workforce. These are kids that are creative and entrepreneurial. Google is their best friend. They were born with smartphones in their hands. They don't know what it's like to actually have to use a payphone or a phone book or a map. They don't know what it's like to actually take take photos on a camera and have to get them printed out to post them on an Instagram that didn't exist, right? They're used to real-time access to information instantaneously. Do you think that they're going to be willing to accept static organizational structures and static work where they have to prove themselves and climb up some corporate ladder that doesn't really exist? They have their own influencers. They're their own leaders. They don't need any of us. They do love Madonna, though, right? Because they can still access her information, her songs, and they know all the words because they can download all of that information. This is a generation that in school has been taught to be creative, has been taught to be resourceful. They've been taught to solve problems. They've been taught to collaborate. They are really passionate. They know what they want. And if they're not going to get it from their politicians or their leaders, they're going to go figure it out and go after it themselves. So they want leaders in our organizations that are purpose-driven, that are passionate, that walk the talk. And just like the millennials that preceded them, if they don't get what they want in the corporate setting, they're going to go figure it out for themselves. These kids all have side hustles while they're working in their schools and doing really well, right? They're setting up businesses where they're selling shoes, they're selling pottery. They're sort of creating entrepreneurial operations as early as 10, 11, and 12. So what do we do? How do we think about what this future is going to look like? We are no longer beholden to a relationship of just a manager and a worker. We have corporate organizations of freelancers and clients and consultants and workers and advisors all working together. What does that really mean for all of us? How are we going to operate now in this new world? We don't have to just work in a building. We don't have to work 9 to 5. We can work in a coffee shop. We can work at the beach. We can work at our house. We can work in a WeWork. Right? We're connected all the time. And work doesn't just happen at work. So when we talk about organizational culture, it's not just about what happens within the four walls. It transcends that. It's how we actually interact with each other, how we communicate with each other. It's the glue that holds us no matter where we are, whether we're in China, whether we're in London, whether we're in Hong Kong, whether we're in a basement in North Dakota somewhere. It's that organizational culture that is going to be super important. And what's really cool about all of the technology that's changing and disrupting how we do our work is that it's actually making us as humans more valuable. Because we know the work that is going to be taken over by technology is work that's process-oriented, work that's repeatable, work that can be easily automated. And so what is unique about us is the creativity and the innovation that we have as humans. That's what's differentiating us. And that's what we have to harness in our organizations. So it's that human talent. What does that really mean for us when we think about creativity and innovation and entrepreneurship? Human talent, right? The strengths that we bring, that is what is going to be what differentiates us. So as you think about your organizations, are you really investing in the people and the talent that exists in your organization? Are you using predictive analytics and data to see how your organizations are going to need to operate? Or are you still using ERP systems that were built in 1995, right? They can't produce a report to give us the analytics that we need. The future is literally now, right? There was a time when we didn't really think that self-driving cars could be a thing, and here we are. So we can't do business as usual. We have to understand that we have an incredibly diverse, creative, entrepreneurial generation that is entering the workforce. They are going to be larger. They are larger than the millennials. So between them and the millennials, they're going to be a huge force on our systems. And they have grown up in a very, very different world than we have. And the world is only going to continue to change faster and faster. When we think about our retirement programs, right, many of us in this room are going to comfortably retire or may already be comfortably retired. Our organizational systems aren't really set up to do that anymore, right? Pension plans have gone away. 401ks are really putting the burden on the employees. So what do we think about? How do we shift that? How do we make sure that this generation gets to also sit on a beach and retire sometime? So 5 things I want to leave you with as you think about the future workforce. You have to build an intentional culture. You need to understand what is going on in organizations from a cultural perspective. Is culture inclusive? Is it thinking about the generations? Is it thinking about gender? Is it thinking about race and national origin? Is it thinking about the different types of work that we have, the different types of workers? Is it including freelancers? Do you have values? Are you really driven by the values in your organization, or do the values just sit on a wall somewhere, right? What do those behaviors really look like on a day-to-day basis? We have to transform leadership. We've been talking about this and saying this for a really long time. But our leaders have to be able to take us into the future. And they have to move away from doing business as usual. Leadership has to be authentic, has to be purpose-driven. They have to walk the talk. We have to modernize our organizational structures. What does that mean? How do we break down the bureaucracy and the silos and the hierarchy that exists in our organization and really foster cross-collaboration and self-directed and fully empowered teams? How do we future-proof our jobs by thinking about succession beyond just the C-suite? How do we ensure that we create career lattices because we know that those ladders don't exist anymore? How do we go beyond and think inclusively of the types of people that are in our organizations? How do we harness the potential of this entrepreneurial generation? One thing that we know is that the future is not going to be business as usual. Thank you.